In Chapter 224 of Jujutsu Kaisen, we have a pretty contentious scene within the JJK community, and we also get an interesting look into the different fighting styles of Gojo and Sukuna. And today, I want to take a little bit of a deep dive into them, starting off with this week's Flame War topic, where we see Sukuna attempt a surprise attack against Gojo, which Gojo turns around to catch with his hand, and more importantly, the Limitless barrier. Now, I touched a bit on this in my chapter review, but I want to talk about it more here. So, at the beginning of this chapter, we see Sukuna getting dog-walked a bit, but once Sukuna is done getting tossed through walls and having large objects thrown at him, he starts his quote-unquote counterattack the same way he started his fight with Mahoraga, which is, as always, spamming dismantle, because that is what Sukuna's specialty is so far. The dismantle chef, if you will. Gojo sees the dismantle flying at him, he gives a bit of a what the fuck face, and we see a little sneaky Sukuna coming in with the buffed fist. Dismantle chops the building in half, it's coming crashing down, and we see them clash together, with a bit of an aura surrounding them. And after this event, we get to see an interesting spread of panels, where we see that Sukuna's amped fist is directly clashing with the Infinity Barrier, and Gojo is clearly aware that something is going on here, which he then responds to by turning off the barrier, or what looks like him turning off the barrier. And it is only at this point that Sukuna shows shock at touching Gojo, and then the building falls directly on top of them. So what exactly is going on here? Well, I and a lot of other people believe this is probably domain amplification, or Sukuna's curse technique, though I'm going to talk about domain amplification first, because this one fits in more with what we currently know. Sukuna really should know what the Infinity Barrier is going into this fight. Not only is he working with Kenjaku, who definitely knows about it, he also has all of the memories of Megumi and Yuji. And if the Walmart spirits Jogo and Hanami were able to learn domain amplification in time to fight Gojo, well, Sukuna not knowing about this is hard to believe. So there are a couple things I want to delve into here. The first thing is that when Gojo was fighting Jogo in Shibuya, he used a similar tactic of lowering his Infinity Barrier to fight their domain amplification. And Jogo, like Sukuna, was shocked to brush his arm against Gojo, because nobody really expects Gojo to ever lower his barrier. And another and more notable thing, in my opinion, is that Gojo states, "I can increase the output of my technique to counter your amplification." And against Jogo and Hanami, I mean, these guys are never going to match the output of Gojo. If the Gojo vs Sukuna fight has taught us anything so far, it is just how much Gojo was holding back in Shibuya. However, this domain amplification would be coming from Ryomen Sukuna, and it's kind of overlooked sometimes, but Sukuna is a top tier barrier user. Both Kenjaku's domain and Sukuna's domain are directly compared to each other as an equivalent feat. I'm not really going to get into who's stronger between Kenjaku and Sukuna with barriers, but Kenjaku has far more barriers tied to his plot, so naturally Kenjaku is going to get more barrier feats than Sukuna would have outside of a domain. And the same thing goes for Gojo, because I doubt Sukuna and Gojo are going to have the same amount of barrier craziness as Kenjaku and Tengen do, even if it turns out later they were all capable of the same thing. And obviously this is just speculation, but this domain amplification, if that's what it is, looks significantly stronger than the one that Jogo and Hanami used, and that's also partially because Gege's artwork has gotten better. And it's not a stretch at all to say that it would be significantly harder for Gojo to output his way through a Sukuna domain amp. And if Gojo was struggling to output against a domain amp like this, well, turning off his barrier is actually a really smart idea. Because as far as we know, domain amplification, it doesn't really buff your hits, it just helps you neutralize techniques, on top of defending you against techniques. And really, I can't see a reason for Gojo to turn off his barrier if it is actually foolproof. Because after this, he didn't respond with anything. He didn't take Sukuna anywhere, the building crashed down on top of them, and they were both falling. Because this building is falling vertically on them, and Sukuna is running up towards Gojo. And we even see the window they are about to crash into fall down on top of them in the previous page. This paneling suggests that the window just cracked over their heads. Which, given what people survive in JJK all the time, honestly, why wouldn't you just eat a window? And I've seen it said that Gojo used Sukuna's hand to finish the sign to teleport. Well, as far as I'm aware, Jujutsu Kaisen is not Naruto, and also, they didn't really teleport anywhere, the building crashed on them. And while I lean towards domain amplification because we actually have feats for this in the story already, it being part of Sukuna's curse technique, that is a possibility. Because Gojo's Infinity Barrier, it is not going to be the end-all be-all in this fight, and Sukuna, he's going to find a way past the barrier eventually. And Gege Akatame didn't just write all this paneling for nothing and show us the individual character reactions. The hints for Sukuna's technique and the hints for how he's going to get past past Limitless, they're going to be there in this fight eventually. And I think that's what this is, because I just don't see much of a point for it being in the story at all if it's not. And this adds a little bit more foreshadowing to this chapter, because overall, this chapter is pretty much just fluff. Really cool fluff and really cool fight scenes, but our characters are pretty much in the same position they were at the beginning of it. But if this is actually some foreshadowing to Sukuna's technique, it'll make reading it later a little bit more interesting. But those were just my 2 cents on that interaction, and now I want to talk about Gojo and Sukuna's fighting styles. Because Gojo and Sukuna have such a unique way of fighting each other in this chapter. Gojo, as always, opens up with the Hollow Purple, completely non-standard, and Sukuna stays generally reserved until he sees what his opponent has. Unless Sukuna is trying to boast, he really doesn't ever pull out more than he absolutely needs to. We saw this against Mahoraga, where his first inclination is, oh, let's have a taste. And he just spams his mantle until he comes up with a plan to actually take down this massive Shikigami. Sukuna is constantly looking for information on his opponent as he's fighting them, and reveals as little about himself as possible. And that's not to say that Gojo is stupid, because he's not, but he is significantly more boastful, and that hasn't really changed against Sukuna, because Gojo is arrogant. He is exceptionally powerful, and the arrogance isn't necessarily unjustified, and this leads Gojo to either underestimate or take risks he really shouldn't. And I'm really liking how Gege Akatame is showing us parts of this where Gojo is just gloating over Sukuna after one surprise attack. Realistically, if Gojo wants to win this, he should be hopping down while Sukuna has no arms, teleport right in front of him, 0.2 second domain. Sukuna's got no arms unless he's about to break the 0.2 second RCT record. Sukuna hadn't even regrown his arms until the building was collapsed. A 0.2 second domain should clear him here unless he has some hacks he can use without arms. Or he is able to spawn his demon form and spawn a domain in 0.2 seconds before Gojo opens one. It's possible he has something to survive this, and we'll probably know by the end of this fight. But whatever he would need, it would need to be pretty specific, and it would need to be very fast acting. But what does not surprise me is that Gojo is too arrogant to ever do something like that. Because really, they're both looking to prove that they are the strongest in this fight. And even though the world hangs in the balance, Gojo was unwilling to go the full cheese mile. And if that's how this fight had ended, well, that would have been the greatest cheese in all of JJK. People ask me all the time why I don't want Kenjaku's merger creature to be the thing to kill Gojo. Well, it's because Kenjaku should have died multiple times already, and Kenjaku has some of the greatest plot armor in this entire series. He should have died in chapter 221, and he should have died to Gojo here. Gojo was fully capable of just leaving the battlefield, killing him, and coming back. They're clearly not by each other. Sukuna didn't even know where Gojo was. And if Gojo was able to find Kenjaku in chapter 221 from miles away instantly, well, he should be able to do it again, and Sukuna will be stuck waiting on that building while Gojo finishes what he started. So Kenjaku being the one to kill Gojo because he survived Gojo like 3 times due to plot, I would find that to be a little goofy, and that is my long-winded answer as to why I don't want the merger creature to kill Gojo. If Gojo has to die in JJK, just let it be Sukuna. There's really nobody better to do it. But that's just my opinion, and I want to hear yours. Let me know what you think about the Gojo vs Sukuna fight and Gojo's potential fight against domain amplification down below. And if you like content like this, subscribe for more. And as always, thanks for watching.